I know what the profession you are going to get in.
Are we good? All right. Okay, thanks again for coming out on a Saturday here. My name is Annie Little. I'm with the Fish and Wildlife Service. I've been with the service for 23 years, and I've been working on Channel Islands restoration projects for the last 16, based out of Channel Islands National Park. So even though I'm Fish and Wildlife Service, I'm co-located with the Park Service, and it's a really great partnership that we have, and we work together on all these projects on the islands. So today I'm going to talk about seabird restoration, and I'm also throwing in bald eagles because everybody loves bald eagles, and it's a great story to talk about. Let's see. That is a Scripps' merlet. It's
Excuse me.
It's a rare. Let me see if I have to fast forward this. Okay, it's not liking that. I'm just going to go like that. Okay, yeah, it's one of our rare seabirds that we have the world's largest population of this species on the Channel Islands. It's only found nesting from the Channel Islands down to Baja California Pacific Islands, just south of the Mexican border. So it's a really rare endemic seabird, only found here on the Channel Islands in northern Mexico.
Ms. Little?
Yeah, we're working it out. Okay, so the Channel Islands, there's 8 of them. 5 of them are in the national park, the 4 northern Channel Islands, and then also little Santa Barbara Island, kind of all by its lonesome out there, 1 square mile. And then we have the southern island, Santa Catalina Island, which is owned by the Catalina Island Conservancy. And then the 2 military islands, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, San Nicolas and San Clemente. Let's see what uses. So Channel Islands are known as the Galapagos of North America. They have an extreme amount of biodiversity, over 2,000 species of terrestrial species just found on the islands, of which 145 are endemic, meaning they're found nowhere else in the world but on the Channel Islands. And then the marine side of things is even more diverse. We have such a diversity of marine mammals that live in the Santa Barbara Channel and that breed on the islands, and an amazing kelp forest habitat, rocky intertidal habitat out there. So the diversity in the marine system is even higher than that on land. These are just a couple of the endemic species that you'll find on the islands. Santa Cruz Island scrub jay, only found on Santa Cruz Islands. We have an endemic deer mouse that is a subspecies on each of the islands, and the plant species on the left is an island buckwheat.
So what makes the scrub jay different than the ones we see?
It's a little bit larger out on the islands and a brighter blue out there. So islands, I really like to work on islands because they're just so unique. Even though they're only 5% of the world's landmass, because of their evolution and their separation from the mainland, they have really interesting evolution, and the pressures on the islands has resulted in just a lot of biodiversity. And so we have, because of this biodiversity on the islands and the different threats, we have over 40% of critically endangered species of the world are found on islands. And since the 1500s, 80% of known extinctions have occurred on islands. And that's again because these species are so rare and so limited to islands that impacts, there's just not populations elsewhere. They're usually restricted to the island itself. So we tend to see a lot of high extinction rates on islands. But with that, islands also present an amazing opportunity for conservation because you are isolated. You can control, to a certain extent, what happens on the island. And so it's also a great place to work and very rewarding. So some of the threats that we see to seabirds and just island species in general include habitat loss. Fortunately, on the Channel Islands, we don't run into that as much because there's not the development pressure. 5 of them are within the national park. The 2 Navy islands are pretty protected. And Catalina Island, is one only island that really has a town, and some of the pressures associated with a population. But in general, islands and their species are impacted through habitat loss, marine pollution such as plastics and oil spills. That's a big issue out here on the Channel Islands. climate change. We're seeing effects on the islands via drought, increased drought, and impacts on the native vegetation out there. Also, we're seeing impacts from climate change with sea level rise. So the higher, you have bigger storm events. Some of our seabirds only nest in sea caves. And so we're predicting that some of those species will eventually be lost, or just their numbers will be really reduced just because of sea level rise and loss of habitat. Ocean acidification, that's just changing acidity in the ocean, and that impacts a lot of the marine species. Harvesting, that's not so much of an issue here, but on other islands where you might have communities will take seabird eggs, for example, or will harvest seabirds for food. We don't have that as much here. And the islands, with respect to fishing, there are some marine protected areas out there that does help control some of the take of marine species. Tourism, and then invasive species. And invasive species is one of those areas that I dedicate a lot of my work to because it has such ramifications particularly for birds, but really for an ecosystem-wide, really has ecosystem-wide impacts. And this is a picture from Guadalupe Island. They have a Laysan albatross colony there. It's the most northern range of nesting Laysan albatross. Most of them nest all the way, on Midway and places in Hawaii. But they have a population on Guadalupe Island, which is off the coast of Baja California. And this is just from one night. They have feral cats on that island. And these are adult dead albatross that were found in the colony just after a night of feral cats in the colony. So you can have an invasive species like a feral cat on an island, or a black rat or something like that, and they can just decimate colonies very quickly. Another impact that we have been dealing with in our area is the effect of marine contamination. And from the late 1940s to the early 1970s, the Montrose Chemical Corporation operated a plant in Torrance, California, and they manufactured DDT, a pesticide. So they were at one point the largest manufacturer of DDT in the world, and they released their waste products into the sewer system, which went off of the outfall off of Palos Verdes Peninsula at White Point there. And they also disposed of their waste closer to Catalina Island offshore. So between the tons deposited in the sewer system and then the additional tonnage put off sea, the contamination really spread throughout the entire marine environment in Southern California and affected species along the mainland, but also primarily the island.
Question?
Yes.
When we talked about the pelicans, the round pelicans, and the DDT,
Yeah.
was it from this?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so here's a little graphic to illustrate what happens. So the DDT would enter into the system and settle in the sediments off of the Palos Verdes shelf. And then it would just make its way through the food chain, first being taken up by worms and other benthic invertebrates, being eaten by fish, and then on and on up the food chain. And the species at the top of the food chain, like brown eagles, pelicans, peregrine falcons, all those suffered really tremendous impacts from DDT because the concentrations as it moved up the food web increased. And so the species at the top of the food web suffered the greatest impact. And here is a picture of brown pelican eggs. So this is on Anacapa Island in the late 1960s and 1969. Anacapa Island only fledged 5 pelican chicks out of the entire nesting effort. So brown pelicans really were impacted, along with other species that I'll talk about, particularly the bald eagle. So in response to this, we were seeing widespread impacts to pelicans. We saw the disappearance of bald eagles and peregrine falcons from the Channel Islands. The scientists started to really ask, what is going on? What is the cause of this? And ongoing research and studies back then led to the determination that this chemical, the DDT, was causing these eggs to be very thin. And so when the birds sat on them or tried to incubate the eggs, then they would just get crushed. And so there was no reproduction. And they traced it back to this massive dumping of DDT in the marine environment. And so state and federal governments brought a lawsuit against Montrose Chemical Corporation and other companies as well that were also disposing of other chemicals. And they had a 10-year lawsuit that settled in 2000, and it provided approximately $30 million to do restoration for natural resources, particularly bald eagles, peregrine falcons, and seabirds. We also received funding to help restore and offset impacts to fishing and in particular subsistence fishing. A lot of subsistence fishers along the coast were impacted from eating species like white croaker or others that were feeding in these contaminated muds. So part of the funding for this program is going to try and educate the public about what's safe to eat, what's not safe to eat, and also just to provide cleaner fish.
How's that money holding up?
So for the bird part of things, which is what I've been managing, we're unfortunately almost done with our money because we started in 2002 with our bald eagle reintroduction program, and now we're 16, 17 years in, and we basically almost spent all of our money. So we're actively trying to find new partners. The fish money, they were a little bit slower to get some of their projects going, but they have spent money on wetland restoration along the coast. They're looking to put an artificial reef out off of Palos Verdes Peninsula next year. So that's a project they have ongoing, a fairly substantial project. And they're also doing a kelp restoration project right now currently. So they still have a little bit more funding, but the bird funding has wound down. I'll talk a little bit about that. EPA, just on the other side of the house, the Environmental Protection Agency, they received about $140 million to try and do remediation at the site, meaning try and clean up. Because it's basically a huge Superfund site now off the coast. And there is a chance that if they do not do an on-site remediation, if there's just really nothing they can do, then there's the possibility we will get an additional $10 million to do restoration, which would extend the life of our program. But
Was the DDT, that site, was it a result of runoff?
basically they dumped it into the sewer system, their waste products. They just
from
dumped
the
it,
manufacturer.
yes, right, from the plant. They just put it into their sewer system.
Runoff just makes it worse.
Yeah, I think most of it was just concentrated within, the sewage pipes. And then the pipes at the White Point outfall, they're just underwater out into the ocean. So, yeah, there is a chance we may get some more funding because it's a lot of people ask like, well, what's the status of the Superfund site? Right now, the sediment, there has been new sediment on top of the contamination, so there has been some control of it. And over time, the amount of contamination has reduced, and it's broken down into different components. So you have sort of the parent chemical, which is DDT, and then it breaks down over time to different, they call them metabolites, basically different forms, which are less toxic over time. And really, EPA doesn't have any good options for working at the site because it's just incredibly expensive to work out there. It's technically very challenging because the Palos Verdes shelf, it basically, like, some of the contamination's up on the shelf and then it drops off precipitously, and then there's a lot of contamination down low, and so there's really no way to try and cover it or cap it.
So what's the biggest turnaround with the ground talent thing?
Time, basically. Yeah, once they stopped dumping, so the DDT was banned in 1972, so it was just less available. And then the contamination, some of the new clean sediment from just, erosion or just ocean movements, put clean sediment on top of the contaminated area. So it just wasn't as available in the food web. So just over time, we've seen the recovery of certain species because it's just not as available to them. like the brown pelican. And it also depends what they eat, because brown pelicans eat sardines and anchovies and fish that are less contaminated. Bald eagles, on the other hand, eat a whole range of things, including marine mammals. And so you have these marine mammals that are really long-lived. They have a whole bunch of blubber where they stores the contamination in them. So you may have a marine mammal that is 30 years old, and this reservoir, basically, of contamination that's moving around, and the eagles eat on it, feed on it, and it gets a really high dose of contamination in a couple feedings. So it just also depends on what you're eating, basically. Okay, so yeah, we got about $30 million to do restoration. And this is just a quick summary of the bird projects. We reintroduced bald eagles to the Channel Islands, which I'll talk about. We've been monitoring peregrine falcons. There was also a program to reintroduce peregrines back to the islands. We didn't do that ourselves, but we've been monitoring the recovery. We are doing habitat restoration on Santa Barbara, Anacapa, and Santa Cruz. And we have been also working with ashy storm petrels on a project off of Orizaba Rock, which is near Santa Cruz Island. We removed feral cats from San Nicolas Island in 2009 and 10. That was a pretty, very interesting project. Worked in on that. That could be another good talk. On its own, it's a very interesting project. And then we had a 5-year project on the Baja California Islands, helping to restore seabirds down in Mexico, because they're all our same seabirds. Borders don't matter to seabirds, and it's really where you can do the most good. And so we funded a large program in Mexico. So just a little bit more about seabirds on the Channel Islands. They are critical to seabirds in Southern California. They really are the nesting habitat for seabirds in our region. There's some good nesting up in the Farallon Islands off of San Francisco, but really for Southern California, the Channel Islands are it for seabirds. And they require the disturbance-free and predator-free habitats, which the Channel Islands, for the most part, provide. There are 13 breeding species. We have the only breeding colonies of brown pelicans in the United States, California brown pelicans. The majority of them actually nest in Mexico, but the Channel Islands are extremely important for the U.S. population. And we have the largest colony of Strixus merlets in the world. That was that first seabird that we saw on the opening slide. So just a little quiz for everybody. Do you know your seabirds? So what's this? Everybody knows brown pelican. Yeah? Oh, California brown pelican?
That's a common seagull.
Okay, what kind of gull?
Oh.
Everybody calls them seagulls.
Jonathan?
And they're really, Jonathan? No.
That was pretty fun.
That was good. So anybody can take a guess at what kind of gull this is?
Two-headed.
No, but there are California gulls. No? This is the western gull. This is the species that you'll see breeding out, particularly if anyone goes to Anacapa Island in March, April. It's wild. I highly recommend, if you want to experience a true seabird colony, go out there in April and you will see 10,000 pairs of nesting western gulls on Anacapa Island and Santa Barbara Island too. It's quite the scene out there, but this is oh yeah, actually it's a little bit of an issue. No, they're all over the place. Yeah, they're just dotted all over. So yeah, it's they usually have guided hikes. They'll have a naturalist come out on the boat with you and take you around the island, and it's really, if you don't mind being in that seabird bird colony feel, it can be a little overwhelming for some people, and the smell. We've had some students that are like, what is going on here? It was just a little overwhelming. But, if you don't mind the moving birds and you want to experience that once in your life, come out to Anacapa. And you'll see. No?
No, I mean, because they...
Oh, target practice for them?
Yeah.
Oh, not for us. Right. Okay, Western Gull. Okay, any guesses for this guy?
The double-breasted booby.
No?
No?
Good try.
Cormorant.
Cormorant?
No, cormorants are black though. That's it's close.
It's about as good as I get.
Loon.
Okay, this one's hard. It's a pigeon guillemot.
Oh.
Yeah, and it's a nesting seabird on the Channel Islands. They have really beautiful red feet, and they have this really nice call. Very distinguishing bird that nests, seabird that nests out on the islands.
What's the name of it?
Pigeon guillemot. Pigeon guillemot.
Does he have like a AKA or something?
No, unfortunately. Well, actually, pigu is so. Bird people, you take the first initials PI and then GU. So pigeon guillemot is pigu. Western gull is wegu. Brown pelican is burpee. So it's like our little acronyms for all these birds. Like when you're in the field and riding it fast, you're like,
Oh,
oh, we got 10 pigus, on that cliff or whatever. Okay, now, cormorant.
so now I was just one
Yeah,
slide
you're
behind.
just a little early. So,
in Santa Barbara,
Mhm.
you seem to be hanging out on this one tree right
yeah,
there.
the eucalyptus trees?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is that? Is that just?
Yeah, they're nesting there. Yeah, it's a little colony of brown cormorants there.
It's pretty good size
Yeah.
quality because
Mhm.
it's so visible from the freeway.
Yeah, there's several trees there.
Yeah.
That,
Yeah.
as you're driving southbound. Yeah,
Right
right
before
there.
you get to Montecito.
Right, yeah, those are cormorants. Yeah, so there's 3 species of nesting cormorants on the islands. This one happens to be Brandt's, but they're pelagic cormorants and double-crested. These are cliff nesters.
In trees.
Well, and trees. But on the islands, it's cliffs, most cliff habitat. Okay, anybody? Any guesses? Yes. Very good. Black oyster catcher.
Because of the race.
These guys technically,
Prizes.
I know, sometimes I bring candy. I forgot my candy today. These guys are technically not really a seabird. They're more of a shorebird, but we like to throw them in just because they're so charismatic and they nest throughout the islands, and they're just such cool birds. So black oyster catcher. All right, this is one of our burrow nesting seabirds out on the islands. They don't have a nest on top. They actually dig down under vegetation and in little. They make these tunnel burrows. Any guesses? No.
Kind of looks like-
Yeah.
Here.
No. This one's hard. This is the Cassin's auklet.
Crap. You have a little baby one in that picture.
Oh yes. Well, did I already show that slide? I
No,
guess.
that was the picture we used on your publicity.
Oh, okay. Oh, yes. Right. So that was a Cassin's auklet on one of our. I'll show you. Right. Very good. Okay, and then this one. The picture doesn't show it really well, but it has this really cool tube at the end of its nose. It's part of the tube nose birds, and it's how they excrete salt. Because they eat a lot of fish or krill or little things, and it helps. They have these tubes that helps excrete the salt. This is the ashy storm petrel. So this is another very rare endemic seabird, only found in the California current. So only nests here on the Channel Islands. It nests on the Farallones off of Southern California and just slightly into Baja California. So very restricted range for this species. And Santa Cruz Island happens to be the biggest nesting population for this species. And this one, anyone take a guess? We have seen it before. It's just the younger version. Western gull? No, not Western gull. This is the Scriptus merlet. That front photo again, the first photo. This is the chick. Yeah, and this species is really cool. It has a very interesting life history. It lays its egg, the adult lays its egg, goes away for a week, come back, lays a second egg. Once the eggs hatch after about 30 days, then the chicks at 1 to 2 days of age will kind of bumble out down a cliff and into the water, and they're raised at sea. So they don't stay on the island. So the fact that we got this picture right at that right window was really cool to see the chick. But a pretty amazing life history for this bird. This is the Scriptus merlet. Oh yeah, there we go. There it is.
What's it look like when it's full grown?
Do you remember that first slide? I think I have another photo. Okay, and this one, any guesses? This is a newcomer. This is our latest breeding species on the islands. for seabirds.
Is it a booby?
Yes.
A booby?
But they're not supposed to be here.
Well, I know. So this is really interesting. So this is the brown booby. They nest in Mexico and farther south. And this is one of these species that we're now seeing hang around the Channel Islands a lot more. And I think this is just going to be a new pattern where we're seeing, last weekend there was a pelagic trip that went out and they saw 5 species, different species of boobies on our trip. Anacapa Island, there's a mass booby right now. Santa Barbara Island, they had nesting of this species last year. We're just seeing new things as temperature changes, as the ocean, food changes and distribution changes. We're going to probably see more of these warmer water species start to populate our islands.
So where are they coming from?
Mexico. Yeah.
Well, how do they get along with the birds that are already there? I know it's kind of early to tell, but
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see. Right now, these guys nested on Sutil. Anyone familiar with Santa Barbara Island? So Sutil is like a little offshore rock on the southeast end of it. And so they nested on Sutil. So they were kind of had their own little domain. But it will be interesting when if they start to nest in greater numbers, there will just be more competition among the cormorants and the pelicans and everything else. So I think it's a little bit early to tell, but eventually we could have albatross. We used to have albatross on our islands. It's in the historical record, but right now we don't. But it's very possible we could have albatross again. And how they compete with the Western gull, I don't know, we'll see. Western gulls are pretty scrappy, so I imagine they'll hold their own. But yeah, we'll see.
Are they following the warmer fish species up?
Yes.
They are.
Yeah. So, we might just start to see distribution shifts. And when we have a warm water year out on the islands, the pelicans typically don't do well. So, you start to see, right now too, we're seeing a lot of abandonment in Mexico from the pelican colonies and seeing more birds nest out here on the Channel Islands. So it really all depends about the food, where the food is, and if there's good cold water off of our coast in springtime, then the birds usually do pretty well. If it's the warm blob, remember we had the warm blob a couple years ago, where we just started to see a lot of poor reproduction of our birds. So it really just depends on how the ocean is doing and changes. Okay, so just wanted to kind of run through a couple of the projects. This is Santa Barbara Island. Well, that's just a picture of Santa Barbara Island. Really beautiful. Anyone know this plant?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, so one of the native Dr. Seuss plants, they call it, out on the island. And so I'm just going to highlight a couple of our projects. So one of them is Scorpion Rock. This is off of the north coast of Santa Cruz Island. And you can see Big Scorpion Rock is the offshore rock that we worked on and restored. And then Little Scorpion Rock is right next door. Little Scorpion actually has a pretty intact vegetation community. So we kind of looked over at it and said, oh, okay, let's try and replicate that on Big Scorpion Rock. And our goal was to try and restore habitat. You guys know these guys now, Cassin's auklet, Scriptus merlet, and actually storm petrels. All 3 of those species nest on scorpion. And they essentially lost their nesting habitat because of this carpet of ice plants. You guys all know ice plants, right? Just one of these non-native invasives from South Africa. Probably birds. Birds moving. Ice plant was originally, it's probably been on the islands for a long time, but the Coast Guard intentionally introduced ice plant onto Anacapa Island in the 1950s when they were out there. And yeah, for landscaping purposes. Yeah, and so birds, move vegetation around, seeds around, wind. There's a lot of ways it can get on there. But essentially, the whole top part of Scorpion Rock was not available for nesting seabirds because you can't burrow through ice plant. It doesn't provide structure for birds to hide under. It's really very poor habitat quality for seabirds. So our goal was to basically trying to remove the ice plant and plant native plants. And from 2008 to 2012, we put about 9,000 plants out. We tried to stabilize the soil out there. And I'll show you a couple photos. Oh, it's very, very challenging working on offshore rock. We grew the plants at Scorpion Nursery, right there at Scorpion Ranch. And then we had to skip them over in these small boats, and then, you know, have a lot of volunteers help. These are actually empty tanks, so they're not that strong, but they're very strong. But we had to have this whole water system on the island because it's really beneficial to water the plants
How do
after
you
we
get
plant
water?
them. So what we would do, the Ocean Ranger is the Park Service vessel. We would have big water tanks on the Ocean Ranger, hook it up to like fire line hoses, and then fill up these tanks and then water on the island. So it required a lot of like, oh, how are we gonna get this done? But the results have been pretty awesome to see. This is in the early part. This is probably our second year of the project. You can see some smaller coreopsis starting to grow, and all those flags are just indicating where the new plants are gonna go for that year. Each color is a different species, so we try to have a diversity of plant species out there. Let's see. And so here's some results. So the first picture on the left is in 2007. That is ice plant in its dormant stage, just kind of dried out. In springtime, it would green up and have more of that green carpet you saw. But it's just no habitat, right? And then here was in 2015, after the rock was restored, and then here it was last year in 2017. And now when we go out there, it's really hard for us even to find the nests because there's just so much vegetation. The birds are just hunkered down. It provides really great cover for them and protection from predators like peregrine falcons or barn owls or that sort of thing. So what we try to do is take what we learned here and apply it on a larger scale. And that's now what we're trying to do on Anacapa and Santa Barbara. So just in addition to the habitat work, we also monitor seabirds. We band them when they're chicks, try and figure out how long they live, where they go, do they come back to the same nesting sites, that sort of thing. And this picture on the left, it's really a very cool picture. This is on Santa Barbara Island. And at night, we'll put out these nets and try and catch birds as they're coming into the colonies. And we do it when it's not full moon, just so it's nice and dark. But that's a cool picture of the Milky Way as seen from Santa Barbara Island. Okay, so just quick, our Anacapa Island restoration project. Here's what it looked like in 1978. And you can see kind of a diversity of native wildflowers in here. We have the purple blue dix, coreopsis, just a range of native annual and perennial species out there. And then the Coast Guard planted ice plant on purpose, intentionally, to try and, for purposes of erosion control and kind of beautification. It's all in the eye of the beholder, I guess, of what you think is, you know, nice. So now we have this monoculture of non-native ice plant that provides very little habitat for pretty much anything, you know, resident birds, migratory birds, seabirds, pollinators. It's really poor habitat quality. So we've been working on the last couple of years, Lighthouse Slope, which is on the eastern part of the island. Here's just a picture. Trying to put out native plants and provide that structure again in that community. So we've been removing ice plant, monitoring the conditions. We bring out a ton of school groups to help us with this project. It's really a great educational opportunity.
How did the Coast Guard react to news that they're ice plant?
Well, I don't even know if they know. I mean, you know, they're done out there. It's Park
Okay.
Service, right? Park Service owns and manages Anacapa now. So it's just one of those things that, you know, at the time they thought they were doing the right thing and improving things out there, but just different purposes. And so now that it's a national park and we're trying to really preserve the species, it's different, you know, different goals out there. So, yeah, I don't know if they know undoing their ice plant.
It's a long time ago.
Yeah. We built a new nursery out there, and we grow about 5,000 plants a year. This right now is our planting window. We're putting in about 5,000 plants this winter. We have basically a 2 to 3 week window where we try and get them all in, and it rained last night out on Anacapa, so it's like perfect timing getting these plants in the ground. Yeah, it's exciting. Hopefully we'll have a good winter. And then already, so these are Western Gull chicks. And this is a plant that we planted in 2016, and you can see already seabirds are starting to use it. It provides a nice little protection for them, you know, from heat. Yeah, so we put out drip irrigation for all of our plants, and we have them on drip for about 2 years, just to try and get them established at first, which we have found is really essential to having enough survival of the plants.
They're spotted.
Yes, they're very cute. And usually they have 2 to 3 chicks per nest. So moving on to eagles. So eagles were historically throughout the islands. We knew of at least 35 nesting pairs on the islands, and they were all also up and down the mainland coast. They were unfortunately, though, persecuted on the islands. They were hunted. There was a lot of egg collection. You know, for a period of time, the islands were ranched, and eagles were considered a menace and a threat to livestock and property out there. So eagle populations really declined, and then the whole DDT effect from the eggshell thinning was kind of the nail in the coffin for that species out there. So the last successful reproduction of eagles was in 1950 on Santa Rosa Island. And we had a few adults hanging around in the later 1950s, but essentially they hadn't been breeding since 1950 on the islands. So the ban happened in 1970. We started to see the recovery of brown pelicans in 1980 and early 1980s. So the decision was made, like, well, let's see if we can reestablish bald eagles back on the island. Maybe, you know, DDT has now been banned for a decade. Maybe we can try and put eagles back out and see how they do. So an effort was made to restore them first to Catalina Island, and between, to Catalina Island with the goal of then they would expand from there and basically start to repopulate all the Channel Islands as they historically were. So the process for reestablishing bald eagles included taking 8-week-old chicks from nests in Alaska and British Columbia, where the population in Alaska never really declined that much compared to the mainland US for bald eagles. So their population was doing fine. So biologists went up to Alaska and British Columbia, took birds back to Catalina Island and put them in these towers called hack towers. And essentially the birds stay there for about 4 to 6 weeks, kind of getting used to the new environment, and then the gates are opened and they're free to go about 11 to 12 weeks of age. So between 1980 and 1986, we released 33 eagles. In 1987, bald eagles typically start breeding about 4 years old. 1987, we had our first nesting pair. But we quickly discovered that their eggs were still very contaminated. And you can just see the difference between a healthy bald eagle egg on the right compared to a Catalina egg, because we started collecting them after we saw that they were all breaking in the nest. And this is what we found. We found that there was still quite a bit of eggshell thinning. These pockets within the eggs just allows too much oxygen transfer, and essentially the chick dies within the egg, or it just becomes so weak that the birds break them when they sit on them. And so this is really when the alarm started going off for the scientists, like, what is going on here? Why are eagles still failing out on the Channel Islands? And this is when the research really started going about the impact of DDT. So other places in the US where DDT was a problem in bald eagles included the Great Lakes. And when you have the concentration of 3 to 5 part per million within an egg, you can expect some level of eggshell thinning. Above 15 part per million DDT in an egg, you can expect complete failure. So here were some areas in the US where we were seeing problems with bald eagles and DDT. Great Lakes was about 2.8. The Columbia River Basin, we had eagles there with concentrations close to 10 part per million in the egg. So when we looked at our Channel Island eagles, though, we were off the charts. We were just magnitudes above these other locations where we knew we were having problems. And that really started the whole investigation of like what's going on here. And then the whole Montrose story and that came to light, and then the lawsuit ensued. So after that was sort of realized that these eggs were so contaminated, this whole program of artificial, like taking the eggs from the nest, artificially incubating them, and then re-putting the chicks back into the nest occurred. So this is just, we worked with the San Francisco Zoo, the Institute for Wildlife Studies, and we ended up having an incubation facility on Catalina Island to make it easier. Then when the chicks were about 2 to 3 days old, they get put back in the nest, and the adult eagle comes back and readily accepts it and then raises it from there. So yeah, I mean, it's a really amazing program that lasted for about 20 years of this whole artificial incubation, trying to keep the eagles out there.
Did it make any difference which egg was from?
No, it wouldn't. Like, you could take a chick from someone else's nest and put it in this nest, and they wouldn't know. Yeah.
So when my parents retired, went up to Nacimiento Lake.
Uh-huh.
I had a boat up there for 20 years, and there was a nesting pairs of eagles moving around the lake. Was that naturally? Naturally, or
yes.
was it?
Yeah, I think on the mainland we have just seen more natural recovery.
It was really cool.
Yeah.
They would, I think they mate for life, and then would stay in their big nest all year.
Yeah, you know, that whole mate for life has kind of been a little blown out of the water now, because we have every eagle. They do. Well, there's trios, there's swapping, there's siblings, yeah, all sorts of stuff. Because all these eagles are tagged on the Channel Islands. And now we have webcams on 5 of the nests, so we know exactly who's with who. Right, yeah,
And we would go to this nest every year.
Yeah.
And every year, the nest is there, there's 2 birds up there. And
Uh-huh.
it's like, wow.
That's cool.
Could have been any.
Right. Well, Lake Casitas, I don't know if you guys followed that story, but there was a female and a male there a couple years ago, and then a female from Catalina Island came over because she had an orange wing tag. We know who she was, and she basically kicked out that other female, and it became this whole, like, we got in a lot of trouble because our Catalina bird came over and kicked out this other female, and there was a lot of drama, you know. But there's a lot of interchange, actually.
So what about golden eagles?
Yeah. Golden eagles were, they took a residency on the island when the bald eagles were gone, and they're the culprit for the demise of the island fox out there. And there's a pig population, and then when the pigs got eradicated from Santa Cruz Island, then the golden eagles switched to foxes.
They like pigs better than foxes.
They like pigs better than foxes, and then foxes were available, and but the golden eagles were removed from the islands. So.
Like Nacimiento too.
Oh, you did? Oh, nice. Okay, yeah, they were relocated to the northern part of California, and like, okay, don't come back. But the goal is that the bald eagles, now that they're established, they would prevent golden eagles from establishing. That's the goal.
Is it working?
You know, it is, for the most part. We do have one golden eagle that's hanging around Santa Cruz Island right now. So it's actually kind of messing with a couple bald eagle territories, but
They're gonna gain out.
we haven't seen a golden eagle establish a population. So hopefully that won't happen. Okay.
Oh, yes.
So then, because of all these problems in Catalina, we looked to try and release eagles on Santa Cruz, thinking, okay, maybe it's farther away from the source of contamination, maybe the birds will do better. So we released, we released 61 eagles from 2002 to 2006. We put transmitters on them, GPS transmitters, so we knew exactly where these birds were going. And it was really cool. Here's A58, one of our birds. right away they started using all the northern islands, San Miguel, Rosa, Santa Cruz, Anacapa, and then you could see them start to go to the mainland as well. We had some birds, this is tracks of 3 different birds. We had some go all the way up to British Columbia and then back down to the Channel Islands. So really, really incredible movements. We had a bird go all the way out to Yellowstone, hang out for a while, and then come on back to the Channel Islands.
That's one bird.
Yeah, each different color is a different bird. We also found out that the biggest source of mortality for our birds was the ocean, trying to cross over to the mainland. So these are tracks of birds that unfortunately did not make it, that they landed in the water for some reason and were not able to get up and make the trek across the mainland. So it was interesting, knowing the fate of some of these birds.
Do you have any theories on why they went into the water?
They could have just run into some weather, just not experienced fires. Wind, yeah, just got exhaustion and landed in the water. And sometimes you'll see eagles in the water off of Catalina, and sometimes fishermen will pick them up and kind of bring them back to the mainland. But it was pretty interesting information. So then in 2006, we had our first real major milestone on Santa Cruz Island. We had 2 nesting pairs, and both of them were successful. They hatched naturally. This was A49, the first chick to naturally hatch on the Channel Islands in over 50 years. And then A49, this is her as an adult, and she now has her own nest on Santa Cruz Island. And she has had chicks, and those chicks have actually started to breed. So we're seeing kind of the 3rd generation now of bald eagles.
Has she moved on to a new guy, or is she?
No, she is still with A46, who actually is her half brother.
What?
Yeah, he's from the same nest, just a couple years later. So kind of interesting. So far they've been able to be successful. And so then after this, yeah.
That eagle, do those feathers on the ends of the wings have a special aerodynamic purpose?
They all do. Yeah, each feather in the wing has its own purpose with the aerodynamics, and they molt at different times. But yeah, they're all different. Stabilizers, yeah. Okay, so then after that success in 2006 on Santa Cruz, everybody got really excited, like, oh, well, let's maybe stop all the artificial incubation on Catalina and see if birds can do it there. Because during that whole time we were on Santa Cruz, we were still keeping the program on Catalina going, that whole swapping eggs and re-releasing chicks back into nests. So in 2007, 2 nests were let natural, the Seal Rocks nest and Pinnacle Rock, and they were both successful. So then that following year, it was decided, let's let all the nests go natural. Let's not do the whole artificial incubation program anymore. So this is a lot going on at this nest, or this slide, but in 1980, this is when the first releases happened. Then that program basically happened all the way through 2000. This is the second big release period on Santa Cruz Island. And then the blue is the natural hatch. So we had our first natural hatch in 2006. And then you can see from that time forward, 2007, we had a couple more natural hatch. And then after 2007, when the Catalina birds did okay, the decision was made, like, we're not going to intervene anymore. These birds can hopefully do it. And so since 2008, we have had all natural hatching on the islands. Yay, I know, it's so awesome for these birds. So really, really remarkable.
18 hatched in
Yes, so, 2007, I think we had, 18 birds fledged.
birds.
18? Yeah, well.
It's a big increase, but.
Right. When you're looking at 2006, we didn't have any pairs that were naturally producing. And then in 2000, and basically 10 years later, we had 18 chicks fledged. It's pretty remarkable, just in a decade.
At Lake Dossabeno, the time that I spent there, it went from like 2 nests to like over 20. I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, at 20? Oh, wow.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Okay.
you would see, at first it would be like, oh wow, look, there's the eagle. And then
Yeah.
15 years later, it's like there's eagles on every corner. Like,
Oh, wow.
Yeah. it's
Yeah.
Cool. It's really cool.
Well, we're going to definitely continue to see eagle population increase.
Do you attribute that to dilution of DDT?
Yeah, I think the contamination is a big factor. It's just not as available in the marine food web anymore. So I think that was the major last factor that was prohibiting them from recovery. And now that's really, some nests still fail, and we think we do still have some eggshell thinning in some of the nests, but it could be because that female eats marine mammal carcasses a lot. So, like for example, at one of the nests on Santa Cruz Island last year, it actually has a webcam on it, the Sauces Canyon nest. They laid 8 eggs. The female laid 8 eggs, and all of them broke. And so we collected some eggshells, and she did have thin eggs. And so, she brought in a lot of marine mammal carcasses to her nest. So it just also depends too what the birds are going to eat. But I think in general, we know the trajectory is in the right direction, and the birds are recovering.
Is it true that they'll have 2 eggs and then they'll pick the stronger one?
Well, no. I mean, they'll incubate both of them the same. And we had 2 nests this year with 3 chicks. So they lay between 1 and 3 eggs. All those 2 nests, all 3 chicks made it. So it really depends. Like sometimes the siblings will really outcompete the younger ones. But if there's enough food, and the Channel Islands have a lot of food, typically you'll see both chicks make it. But it just depends. Like there was a nest in Big Bear this year that was on a camera, and the 2 chicks were raising, and then at 10 weeks of age, one of the chicks died. So it was almost gone from the nest, but it just didn't make it. It just was weaker, and there was a cold snap, and it got snowy. And it didn't make it.
It's not true that they'll disregard the weaker one?
No, they'll try and raise both, but usually the older one will just outcompete because it'll just grab the food first. So, but the eagles will try and raise both chicks. Yep, because they have invested, incubating and right. So right now, this just shows the island, the increase in the island. So eagles were only on Catalina in the red until 2006, and then we had them on Santa Cruz, then we had them on Santa Rosa, and most recently now we have them, on Santa Rosa and Santa Cruz, and San Clemente now has actually just 1 breeding pair on San Clemente. So we think probably the next one up is San Miguel. There used to be a historical nest out there. We have birds hanging around, so we think we'll probably get another one on San Miguel. This is just some numbers. We don't have to go into that, but basically take-home message is the eagles are meeting the criteria in the recovery plan for the species. So they're breeding successfully enough. And then here's the status for 2018. We had 20 pairs across 5 of the islands, 19 chicks fledged, and we think we have about 60 bald eagles total across the islands at this point.
And 1 gold.
Huh?
And 1 gold.
Right, and 1 golden, hopefully. So I just wanted to mention these webcams in case you guys haven't seen them. If you go to www.iws.org, they're really an amazing, we partner with explore.org, and they're just amazing quality. They have audio, they're 24/7, you can watch eagles sleep at night. They're really fun, and there's this whole community associated with them, and they go on field trips to go out to the islands and see the eagles. It's really fun. And we do a lot of work classrooms. This classroom in Oxnard, Lemonwood, they follow the eagles all season. They do every year, and it's really neat just seeing the kids get engaged and really feeling invested in the islands of the eagles. So this is a wrap-up slide. We have so many partners with these bird restoration projects. Just truly amazing partnerships. And with that, that's my email. If anyone wants to come out to Anacapa Island and weed or plant, send me an email. We're always looking for volunteers. So there's lots of opportunities to get engaged out on the island in the restoration work. Take my email if you guys want to follow up with me. Come on out and, yep.
Do you have anything to do, or have you seen any